When the white light dissipated, this time Wendy found herself standing in front of a door, her arm partially extended. It was hard to tell if she was in the process of knocking on said door, or if the task had already been performed. She got her answer when the door opened, and she was greeted by the smiling and quite handsome face of Dipper Pines. Or at least an older-looking version of him, if Wendy had to guess, in his early 30s at the least. "Hey Mabel, you're early. Come on inside." "I'm Mabel." "Score." Wendy mentally cheered as she crossed the threshold to the moderately sized cabin. She was confident she could impersonate Mabel without much issue, at least more competently than she could have for the first 2 bodies she borrowed. "Thanks for agreeing to babysit. Wendy and I both appreciate it." "Babysit? Okay, so maybe this might be more complicated than she thought." "No problem bro. You know I love spending time with the little tykes." "Yeah. Don't let Amy hear you say that," Dipper chuckled. "She already has a bit of a complex over her height." Wendy followed her brother. That was going to be weird, into the kitchen where she found this reality's version of herself drying what appeared to be wine glasses. Wendy had to admit, she'd aged well. Despite slightly shorter hair, and an outfit that was conspicuously not flannel, it would still be hard to tell the difference between them. "Hey Mabes, it's good to see ya. I appreciate you helping us out. We know you would have liked to have gone too." Don't worry about it." Wendy tried to pull off the Mabel eyebrow waggle the best she could. Wouldn't want to be the third wheel on the big date or anything. Both Dipper and his version of Wendy blushed heavily, far brighter than either would have been comfortable knowing. "It's not a date." They both yelled in unison. Though surprised by their reaction, Wendy tried not to allow Mabel to show it. "Well, you're going out on the town together, and you're going alone. What would you two call it? You're well aware of what our tradition is, Mabel. And you also promised to lay off the teasing. It gives the kids the wrong idea, and Lord knows they don't need any more help from you with that." "Yeah man. Dip's out of town for weeks to months at a time for his work, so whenever he blows through Gravity Falls, we meet up somewhere to catch up. You know there's nothing else going on Mabes, you're usually with us most of the time." Wendy, who thankfully didn't have to use Mabel's brain, was struggling slightly to wrap her head around what she was hearing. If she understood this conversation correctly, then it didn't appear that this version of Dipper and herself were together. That made sense the more she thought about it. If you consider that the number of alternate realities is ultimately endless, there were bound to be a few where her and Dipper were never a thing. Hell, she was certain there were some where they probably downright hated one another or possibly had never even met at all. She found the thought of this kind of disappointing, even though the only relationship she really cared about in the end was the one she shared with her version of Dipper. Well, you needed somebody to watch the kiddos, and who can you possibly trust if not Auntie Mabel? "I really don't think the auntie thing is going to fly, Mabel. Oh, and you'll have to forgive them. It's nothing against you, but they're not exactly crazy about the idea of having a babysitter, but they haven't exactly left us much choice. Speaking of the little troublemakers, should we call them on down?" "No problem," Wendy agreed as she walked over to the staircase near the kitchen and yelled up. "Amy! Greg! Get your butts down here. Dipper and I are about to head out for the evening. Greg, you have my permission to drag her down here by her ear if you have to." "Hey!" "No problem, Aunt Wendy." It turned out that Wendy, in her Mabel disguise, would only have to wait a few seconds to meet the kids as they came bounding downstairs. And she wasn't prepared at all for what she was about to see. When she learned she'd be babysitting, she was expecting younger grade school children. She wasn't expecting 2 teenagers. Well, 1 teenager, and 1 preteen if her initial assumptions were on point. The girl, Amy, was obviously hers. She looked just like her. Seeing her standing right next to this reality's version of Wendy only furthered to nail that point home. Her hair only went down to her shoulders, and she was wearing a hockey jersey as opposed to the traditional corduroy flannel, but those were the only 2 slight noticeable differences. She looked to be around 11 or 12. The older boy wasn't quite the perfect match as Wendy's daughter, but Dipper couldn't have denied the kid was his son if he wanted to. Our Wendy could still see the many similarities between him and the 14-year-old Dipper from her reality, only this kid seemed a bit taller and had a slight athletic build. His fashion sense seemed to line up more accurately with your typical teenager than his father's ever did, though he did sport a similar vest that was always one of Dipper's trademarks. The girl was the first to speak, rather excitedly as she looked up at her mother. "You're leaving already. Does that mean?" That's when Amy noticed Mabel standing in the kitchen and her face fell. Put on the spot, Wendy put on what she hoped was her best cheesy Mabel smile and waved. "Oh. Hi, Aunt Mabel." "Dad." The boy grumbled to his father softly, but Mabel's ears picked up what he was saying anyhow. "Come on, I'm 14. I don't need a babysitter." "Yeah, and I just turned 12. I don't think that's helping our case as much as you think it is, Amy." "Sorry, Greg, but you guys just haven't proven to us that we can trust leaving the two of you alone. The last time we left you two to your own devices, you unleashed a Kandarian demon that possessed Seuss, and because you two tried to cover it up for an entire week, Seuss wound up starting a cult in his basement dedicated to the world's new savior. And the time before that, you and Amy snuck into Grunkle Ford's old lab and nearly burnt the mystery shack to the ground. Sorry kids, but when the two of you get together, total chaos tends to break out, so until you earn back our trust, this is the way it's going to have to be. They do seem to get into a lot of mischief, don't they?" Wendy said using Mabel's voice, both an observation to herself and to hopefully keep up the illusion that she knew what the hell was going on. "Actually, they're pretty good kids by themselves," Wendy snickered. "Get them together though and their horrible influences on each other." Wendy smirked and nudged her version of Mabel in the shoulder. "Sound familiar?" While she might not have possessed the full encyclopedia to Mabel, she'd observed the twins enough over the years to know that they got themselves into much more mischief when working together than they ever did alone. The memories brought a smile to Mabel's face. "Sure does. Makes me feel bad for them though." Dipper wasn't quite finished with his lecture. "And one more thing, you two are staying indoors tonight. No sneaking off to wander around the valley." Greg seemed much more upset with that command than Amy did. "Oh, come on, Dad. We only get to visit Gravity Falls a few times a year. One of the most active areas in the entire world, and you expect them not to explore it? Not without my supervision, you're not. You're too young to be wandering the valley by yourself, especially late at night." Greg crossed his arms stubbornly. "Weren't you my age when you and Aunt Mabel started investigating the mysteries of Gravity Falls by yourselves?" As a matter of fact, no, we weren't. We were 12. She couldn't help herself. It was too in character for Mabel. Not helping sis. Dipper turned his attention back to his son. "Gregory. What happened the last time you snuck out of Aunt Mabel's house to explore the falls at night?" The boy got nervous, knowing exactly where this was headed. "I discovered that rare flesh-eating plant that disguises itself like moss." "And how did you discover it?" Greg's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Because it tried to eat me. More like succeeded in eating you. If we hadn't have happened to notice your head sticking out of the creature's mouth, it would probably still be digesting you. At least I got a plant named after me." "One that eats people," Amy snorted, then quickly reconsidered her opinion. "Actually, that is pretty cool. You're both staying indoors and that's final. Greg, I promise we'll take a hike through the valley before we have to leave town again. Show you some of sights we haven't gotten the chance to get around to yet. I'm sure Aunt Mabel wouldn't mind tagging along for old time's sake." "Sounds like a plan to me." The discussion was basically over there whether the kids liked it or not. They didn't, but even their parents had a sinking suspicion that their children were plotting behind their backs. In fact, no sooner was the door closed with their parents on the other side, did Amy turn to the woman she recognized as her Aunt Mabel and asked excitedly. "So, when do you sneak out to go spy on them?" "I don't think we're going to be doing that, Amy. Your parents made it pretty clear that you two had to stay in the house while they were gone." "Oh, come on. They always say something like that, and you usually find a way to sneak us out anyway. Besides, if we don't put our plan into action and give those two the nudge they need, they're never going to get past the just hanging out and drinks with friends phase. Wendy blinked in surprise. She wasn't quite sure how to handle this situation, or rather how Mabel would handle it. The maids she knew wouldn't have wasted a second to seize the opportunity to play matchmaker, but she wasn't quite sure if Mabel in her 30s would still be quick to jump at that. Especially when said targets had entrusted her with their kids. I don't know, Amy. Maybe it's not such a good idea to mess with your parents' love life. Since when are you shy about getting involved with people's love lives? You're the one who recruited me into this operation, remember? Well, that answered that question. Mabel clearly never grew out of her Cupid stage. Now clearly she had no idea what Mabel's scheme was, so there was absolutely no way she could even guess what the two girls had been plotting. Thankfully, she got some unexpected support from an unexpected source. Aunt Mabel's right, Amy. Dad and your mom seem more than content with their relationship as it is. All that trying to push them together in the past has accomplished is a lot of awkwardness. Maybe you should just leave well enough alone. Because I know things you don't okay. Why are you always so against the idea? I'm not. But I'm capable of thinking about the subject logically rather than just looking at it emotionally. My dad's job has us crisscrossing North America, and we're never in one place for very long. It would be a long-distance relationship at best, and those just aren't very healthy. It's one of the main. Of many, many reasons my parents aren't married anymore, but it was still a major sticking point. Well, maybe if he focused his work closer to home, they wouldn't have to worry so much about the long-distance thing. Greg laughed. Why would he want to do that when there's so many mysteries left to investigate? Well, I'd figure you'd have a more vested interest in your dad settling down due to that custody battle going on. You know, since your dad's globetrotting is the only point your mom has in her favor. The lips of Amy's daughter curled into a wicked sneer. Unless you're wanting to go live with your mom full-time? Gregory Pines turned pale, as if death itself was taping upon his shoulder. He turned towards Mabel and did a complete 180. On further consideration, maybe it wouldn't be the worst idea to see how Dad and Aunt Wendy's night is going. As curious observers. Oh, come on. Wendy laughed at this reaction. Is the idea of living with you, Mom, really that bad? I'd rather have let the Pinus Gregorius swallow me whole. How could you even ask that, Aunt Mabel? His mom is a total. #%. Wendy gasped. You watch your mouth, young lady. That was totally inappropriate to say. Amy stared at the woman she considered a part of the family in total confusion. But that's what you always call her. I'm an adult. If you want to use those types of words, you need to do it like every other kid your age. Behind your parents' backs. Aunt Mabel. You're the one that taught her most of those words. When she was 8. Wendy flinched again. Okay, so being Mabel was going to be more difficult than she thought. Then she considered how this development could be advantageous to her situation. She'd located the first 2 memory fragments directly after witnessing rather intimate scenes between different versions of herself and Dipper. Perhaps maybe wherever they were getting reacquainted was right where she needed to be. All right. Maybe it wouldn't be too intrusive if we just go watch from afar. Do either of you remember them mentioning where they were going tonight? The way the kids were looking at her told Wendy that this was information she definitely should have already had. Amy answered for her anyway, the same place you guys always go when you adults hang out. That bar place Mom's friend Lee owns down the road. Oh, duh. That's right. Now that just left one other problem. How was she going to recognize Mabel's car? Wendy quickly thought up an idea and handed Greg her keys. I need to run to the bathroom before we go. You guys go ahead and meet me at the car. Actually, taking your car probably isn't the best idea, Greg explained. The shooting star and glitter decals aren't exactly inconspicuous. It might be a better idea if we walk. The bar is less than a mile away after all. Oh please. He just wants to walk because he wants to find that jackalope thing he claims he saw the last time he was here. It wasn't a jackalope. That's a rabbit with antlers, and more importantly, it doesn't exist. This thing was clearly a large gopher-like creature. That coincidentally also has antlers, but nobody else in town has ever reported seeing anything like it. Even with the extreme levels or weirdness of Gravity Falls, I might have possibly spotted something completely unknown. Wendy couldn't help but smirk at Greg's excitement and determination. He really did remind her of his father at that moment. All right then, a walk it is. I will warn you though, I had a big lunch so you two might end up having to carry me back home. It wouldn't be the first time, Amy deadpanned, as Greg just shook his head. The blank look on Mabel's hinted towards Wendy's own hope that this was some kind of joke. The walk was fairly routine and uneventful, seeing as the trio basically just had to follow the main road to get to the nearby pub. Greg, of course, was scouring the area for any sign of his rodent cryptid, and Amy watched him in amusement. Any sign of your horned friend? No, of course not. We'd probably have to go much deeper into the valley to have any hopes of finding it. If it was hanging out alongside fairly busy roads, the creature wouldn't be so elusive. Hey, don't give up so quick. Even if you don't find your wergopher or whatever, maybe you'll bump into your little plant girlfriend. Greg didn't appreciate the snarky look on his younger friend's face. If we do, at least this time I'll have you to throw at it while I get away. Oh, like you could even lift me off the ground, dork. Pretty sure I can with very little trouble, twerp. Ouch. Greg grabbed at his shin where Amy had just kicked him. That freaking hurt. Good, don't call me twerp. Would you two knock it off? Wendy scolded in a tone that wasn't quite suited to come out of Mabel's mouth. The kids must have sensed this too, since they instantly shut up. Feeling slightly guilty, Wendy pressed forward as she tried to sort out in her head what she knew and what might be beneficial for her if she did now. She now knew Greg's mother and Dipper were divorced and in the midst of some type of custody dispute. What she didn't know were the reasons behind why Amy's father didn't appear to be in the picture. It wasn't like she could straight up ask the girl about it either, since Mabel would obviously already be aware of that information. Perhaps there was a sneakier way she could broach the subject. Hey Amy. I was just curious. If you ever were successful in getting your mother together with my brother, how do you think your father would feel? Amy shrugged. Why would I care how he feels? Never even met the guy, and don't ever care to. He could be rotten in the ground for all I give a crud. Wendy was floored by that revelation. If Amy's father had been out of the picture since she was born, then that meant either Wendy had gotten herself knocked up and the father took off, or Wendy herself had consciously chased him off. While the latter sounded more like something she'd personally do if pushed, getting knocked up in the first place didn't sound like her at all. She wasn't a prude or anything, but she wasn't easy either. It was difficult for Wendy to imagine herself personally in that situation. Then again, she was stressing over an alternate version of herself from another reality. Just because they were two versions of the same person didn't mean they were the exact same person. It wasn't long before the trio arrived at their destination, not that Wendy wouldn't have realized that if the kids hadn't confirmed it for her without her needing to ask. Why the kids referred to this establishment as a bar she wasn't quite sure. It was more along the lines of a bar and grill that was more grill than bar, but Wendy assumed the kids were just referring to the place based off of what they heard from their parents when they referred to it. The idea of her old high school friend Lee owning his own alcohol-based business probably made the most sense of any of the strange inaccuracies between this dimension and her own. It didn't take long to find the Dipper and herself from this reality either. They were clearly visible through one of the restaurant's windows, seated at a corner, both sharing a laugh about something. Well, they look perfectly fine and happy. Can we go back to your place now, Amy? Greg asked erratically, apparently already getting cold feet over this operation. What are you talking about? They always look like that when they get together. The entire point is to push them towards the next level past the friendly stage. And how exactly do you plan to pull that off? You know, since every other time you've played matchmaker has worked out so spectacularly. Why are you so hung up on the idea of them hooking up anyway? You're borderline obsessed with it. I have my reasons. As do you, in case you've forgotten. Amy crossed her arms and smirked smugly. Unless you're looking forward to those long winter evenings in Connecticut with your mom, hundreds of miles away from any hope of ghost hunting or any of those adventures with your dad that you love so much. Greg turned pale again. He turned to Wendy and asked, "Any ideas, Aunt Mabel? You are the expert here in meddling in people's love lives." Mabel looked like a deer in the headlights, because that was exactly how Wendy felt. She was in no shape or form anything close to a competent matchmaker. She could hardly keep her own love life in order, if her current reality-hopping predicament wasn't indicative of that. "I don't know about this one, guys. You can't force two people together like that, trust me, I've tried. Many times. But you got Aunt Tambry and that Robbie guy together." Amy reminded her. "Yeah, I wouldn't consider that one a win." Mabel certainly would have, but Wendy was answering as Wendy for that one. "Either way, if your parents wanted to be more than just friends, don't you think it would have already happened? Trust me, nobody wants to see those crazy kids happy more than I do, but even I understand that there's only so hard you can push. You can hope, you can drop hints, you can tease, but regardless of what you might want for them, they ultimately have to want the same thing. You kids understand that, don't you?" "I do, it's this one who has the issue getting that message." Amy frowned at her friend before looking up at Mabel with mix of frustration and desperation. "Yeah, I get that, okay. What was the point of comin' all the way out here though if you never planned on doin' anything? I want to say to peer pressure, but these are just kids and Mabel has to at least be twice their age." Wendy thought to herself. Well, just because we can't force them together, doesn't mean we can't set the mood for your parents and hope for the best. The kids looked up at their babysitter, clearly confused. Wendy bent down to their level and relayed the plan she hoped would be enough to appease the eager mini version of herself. It was a plan she'd seen Mabel incorporate during her matchmaking schemes a couple of times, and it was by far the least intrusive of them. "So, do you guys understand what you're supposed to do?" "Yeah, sure. I guess it's better than nothin'. How are we supposed to sneak around the bar without getting noticed? Amy in particular, if she has to get that close? Dude, just channel your inner little ninjas. Besides, it's dark and crowded enough in there, that we'd almost have to be trying to get caught if we do. Now let's do this thing. In and out in less than 5 minutes, and then we disappear into the night." Greg and Amy shared a look as they followed Mabel into the restaurant. "Did Aunt Mabel just call me dude?" "Yup. She sounded so much like Mom during that little pep talk, it was almost creepy." While their relatives plotted outside of the bar, this reality's version of Wendy and Dipper shared a few laughs and a couple of stories highlighting what they'd been up to recently. Or currently in Dipper's case, what he planned to be doing soon in the future. "Argentina? That's quite the trip, Dip. The most exotic place I've ever visited is Portland. Is taking Greg out of the country the best idea right now though? I don't see any scenario where Tara doesn't try to use it to her advantage in her little custody dispute. Let her try. We're not going to miss out on the opportunity to investigate one of the most haunted locations in the entire Western Hemisphere because my ex-wife likes to make a pest of herself. She's the one who willingly signed over her custody rights to me when she decided she didn't want to be a mother, so she's basically going to have to prove I'm Charles Mason before she has a prayer in hell of taking my son away from me. Don't you ever worry about it, thought?" Wendy asked with concern. Tara actually finned in a way to win her custody rights back. Every morning, every day, and every night. Dipper sighed, but tried his best to keep a smile on his face. "I'm not here tonight to worry about the biggest mistake I ever made in my life though. I visit you when I'm trying to forget all that crap, so let's just focus on the good stuff in our lives this evening." Here. Wendy agreed as she raised her beer. She was soon distracted by a slow song that began playing over the loudspeakers. A song she knew very well. "You okay, Wendy?" Dipper asked, noticing a look of recollection in his friend's eyes. Huh? Oh yeah, I'm fine. It's just, I kind of like this song. It's one of my favorites actually. She blushed faintly and tried to cover it up by taking a drink of her beer. Really? I never would have guessed you'd be one for sappy old love songs. I'm not usually. This one's an exception, not the rule. I wonder who chose this song though. It's not exactly particularly well known. Wendy looked in the direction of where the jukebox was located, and Dipper followed suit. There were just too many people in that general area to even wager a guess of who fired up that particular song. What the momentary distraction did allow was for a small redhead to pop up from behind the conveniently empty booth next to the one Dipper and Wendy were sharing. Amy was just tall enough to reach the light bulb and had just enough time to twist it a couple of times before it flickered off, cueing her to dive back behind the booth before the adults could notice. Their eyes immediately turned in the direction of the lamp right above their heads. Huh, guess the light is shot. Dipper stated obviously, meaning the only light at their table were a few candles on the windowsill, and bleed over from other light sources. A couple minutes earlier, a slightly paranoid Gregory Pines dropped a couple dollars in quarters into the jukebox and selected 6 songs Mabel had specifically instructed him to choose. Some of those songs he'd never heard of, but there were a couple he did recognize as slow romantic love songs. As soon as the final song was selected, Greg ducked down low in hopes he wouldn't be seen, and then got the hell out of the restaurant as fast as his legs could take him. As the first song came to an end, the second began to play and got Wendy glaring over in the direction of the jukebox again. It was another relatively unknown love song that happened to be a favorite of hers. There was no way this was a coincidence. Recognize this song too, I take it? Dipper observed, basically having already figured out what was going on. He was curious as to whether Wendy had caught on yet or not. Before Wendy could respond though, a cheerful voice interrupted them. Hey guys, what's up? Hey, right back to you, Lee. I'm just wondering who got into my phone and snooped around my playlist. I have no idea what that means. Anyway. Lee paused as he noticed the lamp hanging above their booth was off. Oh, I see, the lamp is out. You want me to get that bulb replaced for ya? Nah, it doesn't bother me. Me neither. Oh, I get it. Lee waggled his eyebrows. A little mood lighting, I take it? Dude, it's not like that, and you're well aware of it. If you say so, Wendy. Lee shrugged before setting an expensive-looking bottle of wine down on the table. This is for you, by the way. A gift from a mysterious benefactor. The old friends stared at the bottle and then looked back to Lee. Dipper asked, and who is this generous individual? Sorry, I can't tell ya. They tipped me way too well, so I'm obligated to keep my mouth shut. If it was anybody we know, you'd think they'd know we don't drink too much wine. Wendy studied the bottle as if it were a puzzle that was begging to be solved. Lee shrugged, just as confused. I know, right? I didn't quite understand it myself. Oh well, it's yours either way, so try to enjoy it. Later, guys. As Lee walked away from their table, Dipper looked directly at Wendy and smiled as he watched her brain working to put all the pieces together. A bottle of wine. 2 of my favorite songs. The light conveniently goes out, meaning we're drinking by candlelight. Crud, this can only mean one thing, right, Dip? You are correct. Dipper confirmed as he picked up the bottle and took a closer look. Mabel and the kids are definitely lurking in the shadows somewhere. I'm kind of surprised it took them this long to finally show up. So what do we do then? Should we just ignore them? And deny ourselves the opportunity to bust them in the act? Dipper smirked mischievously, one that Wendy quickly returned. Not a chance. Just out of curiosity, Dipper stood up and grabbed the allegedly burnt-out light bulb. A couple of quick turns clockwise, and sure enough, the light came back on to Wendy's slight surprise. Clever little turds, I'll give them that much. If Dipper had looked out the window to his right at that moment, he would have seen the three rouges in question attempting to make a quick getaway. So, do you really think a couple of cheesy love songs and a bottle of wine is gonna work? Nope, she answered Amy honestly. But what I can do is hope that I'm wrong. Like I said, we can only steer them in the right direction. They have to arrive at the destination themselves. I guess. Amy grumbled, as she kicked at some rocks that had come loose from the cement parking lot. Her Aunt Mother from another reality looked down at the preteen, truly curious as to why her mini-me was so determined to see her mother and her version of Dipper become something more than friends. You know, Greg wasn't kiddin' when he accused you of being maybe a little too invested in your mother's love life. You haven't really explained why though. I'd even say you're worse than me, and that's saying something. My reasons are private and my own. Why can't anyone understand that and stop bugging me about it? Maybe if you stopped dragging us into your madness all the time, we wouldn't have a reason to demand answers from you, Greg challenged her. We are kind of putting our necks on the line, risking getting into trouble on the account of you, so I think we do deserve some kind of explanation. Look, there are really good reasons I can't say anything, all right. You're just going to have to. The argument was interrupted by a loud noise that sounded a lot like trash cans being knocked over. That's exactly what it turned out to be as the trio saw a pair of waste bins around the side of the building that had been leveled. There was just enough light illuminating the area to make out a fuzzy rodent-like creature standing on its hind legs. Antlers protruding from its skull. That's it. Greg marveled as he pointed. That's the jackagopher whatever. The creature I saw. No freakin' way. Amy followed up, also in disbelief. The large gopher-like creature stared down the humans for a moment, before dashing off into the darkness of the woods behind the bar. Oh, no you don't this time. Greg shouted as he started to chase after the creature, Amy following after him without hesitation. Get back here. What the hell are you two doing? Wendy shouted after them, but they had already disappeared into the wilderness. Ah, son of a bitch. Wendy managed to keep eyes on the fast-moving kids for a bit, but quickly found herself running out of breath. She managed about another 100 feet or so before she was forced to stop so she could catch her breath, or otherwise risk passing out. What the hell is going on? I shouldn't be this winded already. That's where the answer smacked her upside the head. She was exhausted because she wasn't in her young athletic body. She was in Mabel's not quite so athletic 30-something body. And let's be real, Mabel's love of baked good and other sugary delights was bound to have done a number on her as the years dragged on. You kids get back here. She shouted through heavy panting, before whispering to herself. I swear, when I find I'm gonna kill both of them. I don't care if push one of them out of me eventually. Back on the trail of the gopher thingy, Greg called over to his friend excitedly. You saw it, didn't you? Didn't you? Of course I saw it. How the heck was I not gonna notice a beaver with horns? Not a beaver. It appears much more closely related to the gopher family of. Who cares what kind of big rat it is? Let's just find it and. Amy paused as a glint of something sprinting through the forest caught her eye. There. It's over there. I saw it too. Greg smirked confidentially as he changed directions. I got you now, you sneaky little. As the son of Dipper pursued the surprisingly nimble creature, he got his foot caught in some vines, his momentum sending him face-planting into the dirt. He was far more concerned that his target was quickly pulling away and out of his sight again than he was his potentially broken face. Damn it, he cursed as he slammed his fist into the dirt. Greg, are you okay? He heard his friend call. Yeah, I'll live. But I lost sight of the mystery creature. Greg picked himself up and tried to dislodge himself from the weeds he'd apparently gotten his foot tangled up in. Only to feel the vine tighten around his ankle to a point it was really starting to hurt. That was the least of his problems though. More vines began to lift off the ground, creeping up Gregory's body until they wrapped themselves around his arms and even his waist before then began to tighten around him. What the hell? No, it can't be. Greg paused as he heard a strange flapping sound behind him. One he recalled all too well. He turned his head around to find a plant with a large bloom that resembled a watermelon-shaped head of lettuce with a mouth, petal-like protrusions included that resembled teeth. Gregory pines and come face to face with his old nemesis. Pinus gregorius. Let go of him, you leafy freak show. Amy bellowed, as she took her axe and started to chop at the vines restricting Greg's limbs. Only for the creature to make a wailing-like sound before it produced more vines that immediately wrapped themselves around him again. One even took hold of Amy's left arm, forcing the little redhead to use her axe to free herself. Amy, get out of here before it gets a hold of you too. There's no getting loose when it wraps its vines around you. No way, man. I'm not leaving you. Seeing as her axe wasn't getting the job done, she grabbed her lifelong friend by the hands and tried desperately to pull him away from the carnivorous plant's head. She tried and struggled, but to no avail. Feeling he had no other choice, Greg shoved Amy away from him with as much strength as he could muster. Meanwhile, his head was getting closer and closer to the plant monster's mouth. I'm a lot bigger than the last time I had a run-in with your kind. I bet you won't even be able to fit my head in your mouth, you stupid plant. Greg's eyes widened when he felt his arms get grabbed and found himself being pulled forward again. Amy, please stop. These vines work like quicksand. The more you struggle, the tighter they wrap around you. I'm not getting out of this. I'm not giving up on you. It's my fault we're in this situation. If I wasn't so determined to meddle in my mother's love life, and I just believed you about the stupid gopher thing in the first place, we wouldn't be in this mess. I'm the one who stupidly went running blindly into the dark woods. If this is anyone's fault, it's mine. We can argue over who's to blame after we survive and put this little shop of horrors reject out of its misery. Amy might have spoken too soon. By this point, vines had wrapped around her legs and arms, and she too found herself unable to wiggle herself free. As the two old friends continued to be pulled towards their doom, they shared a terrified look that sadly seemed to serve as a final goodbye. Greg closed his eyes, shivering as he felt an oddly warm breath-like sensation on the back of his neck. Before the plant could chomp down on its intended meal though, a much larger axe came down and almost immediately severed every vine restraining Greg, the boy's momentum causing him to lunge forward. Amy's vines were severed next, and both kids felt a pair of reasonably strong hands grabbing them by the napes of their shirts and hastily pulled them safely away from the killer plant's range. Are you two okay? Dad. Greg panted in relief as he hugged his father. Wait, where's my mom? Amy asked, but her answer came when she heard a telltale grunt. She turned towards where the plant creature had just been, only to find her mother ripping the monster out of the ground by its roots. She aggressively tossed the now lifeless plant aside, leaving it to rot. She dusted off her hands before walking over to her daughter and the others. Oh crap. I forget what a badass mom is sometimes. She is a flippin' corduroy, Amy, as are you. Dipper smiled as his friend approached, eyes filled with concern. They seem to be fine, Wendy. Just a little shaken up. Before Wendy could respond, Mabel came bursting through the bush, sucking in all the oxygen surrounding her like a vacuum cleaner. Greg. Amy. Are you too? Mabel paused as she noticed the kids safely standing beside their parents, which was a good thing. The looks they were shooting in her direction were anything but good. Aw, crud. Once the parents of the mischievous children had ensured those children were indeed unharmed, the chewing out of a lifetime soon followed. Nearly getting themselves eaten by a carnivorous plant made the tongue lashing 5 times worse than it would have been otherwise. All offending parties just sat there on their knees, willingly accepting the verbal barrage as Dipper was finally finishing up his end of the tirade. We're extremely disappointed in you guys. No more looking the other way. You are going to have pay the price for your actions this time, is that understood? Yes, Dad. Yes, sir. There was a brief hesitation before he received the final response he was waiting for. Yes, Dipper. Good. You're all grounded for the foreseeable future. We'll decide what your punishments will be soon enough, but I think everybody's been through enough tonight. Wendy, the one occupying Mabel's body, was struggling really hard not to laugh. It wasn't lost on her that it was actually Mabel and not Wendy herself getting the lecture where she was basically being chastised like she was one of the kids. You have no actual authority over me, Dipper. You can't ground me, I'm 33 years old. You're 35, Mabel. We've been over this. Just because you try to shave a few months off your age every time somebody asks you how old you are, that doesn't mean you're actually getting younger. And I won't be the one enforcing your punishment, Wendy will. So if you want to risk defying her, be my guest. Wendy managed to keep Mabel in character. I'll be good. I'm not getting my hopes up. Greg, we should probably be going. I think you and Amy have seen enough of each other for one night. The two kids looked at one another. Considering what they'd just been through, being separated really wasn't what they wanted at all. Being the dutiful son, Greg complied and went to stand next to his father. Wendy, do you and Amy need a ride home? Nah, it's not a long walk back to my house at all. Besides, I'd like to have a little one-on-one chat with my daughter on the way home. In a stark contradiction to Greg, Amy chose to show defiance. And what do we have to talk about that you can't say in front of everybody else? Are you that afraid a certain somebody might find out? I wouldn't have had to put us in harm's way this evening if you'd just be honest with Amy. That is enough. Wendy shouted. You know the contents of that conversation were private between you and me. Even bringing it up is a betrayal of that trust. Whatever, can we please go home now? Oh, do you mind if I walk back with you? I kind of left my car at your place. Technically not a lie, Mabel's car was still in the driveway, but that's not the reason she wanted to tag along. No problem. But I need to have that talk with my daughter in private. Amy gulped as her mother gave her the look she dreaded so much. One of the few things in the world that could make the little Spitfire cower in fear. Wendy grabbed her daughter by the hand and walked her deeper into the woods for a bit of privacy. The Wendy from the other reality was having none of that though. She followed behind them as quietly as she could manage, hiding Mabel's body behind a tree close enough to listen in on the mother-daughter conversation. Amy. You need to stop. Stop what? Don't play dumb, you know what I'm talking about. When I had that heart-to-heart with you a while back, it was because I was under the impression you were emotionally mature enough to handle it. It wasn't an invitation to start interfering with my love life. But you said. I said a lot of things during that conversation. Including explaining to you why things wouldn't work out between the two of us, and that Dipper and I were content just being friends. If we wanted anything more than that, we're grown adults perfectly capable of coming to that decision ourselves. Doesn't feel like it. It looks to the rest of us like you two are just dragging your feet because you're scared. Amy crossed her arms stubbornly. I'm sorry if my interfering is annoying sometimes, but I just want to see happy. What in the world makes you think I'm not happy, Amy? It's always just been me and you, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Because I'm not stupid, Mom. Amy shouted up at her, surprising her mother. I may not be book smart like Greg, but I notice things. I see you drinking a little bit too much. Blankly staring at the TV at night like you're completely numb and have no idea what to do with yourself. That disappointed look you get whenever you talk about how people rarely call or visit. I'm not blind, Mom. You're lonely, and there's a big difference between being content and being happy. Amy. Wendy was speechless. Was she really so obvious that her own daughter was capable of reading her like a book? Whether I'm happy, lonely, or whatever, that's not something a kid like you needs to be worrying about. You're my mom, how am I not supposed to worry? Amy started to kick at the grass beneath her feet. I know Uncle Dipper and Greg aren't around that often, but when they are. How do I say this without sounding weird? We almost feel like a family. A strange, extremely unconventional family, but still a family. Like missing pieces of a puzzle coming together. You definitely seem happier when he's around. I could have seen that without you telling me how you felt about him. So, that's why you're so. Wendy sighed, and wrapped her arm around her slightly teary-eyed daughter's shoulders, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's not like I've never thought about it myself, Amy, but there's one major problem. Dipper's love is his work, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. He even puts it before his own son, though I'm pretty sure he doesn't even realize he's doing it. I'm sorry, but I have no interest in getting involved with somebody who's never going to be around. If he knew how you felt, maybe that would be motivation enough for him to be around more often." Amy offered weakly. "He enjoys his work too much, Amy. I wouldn't ask him to give that up just for me. Wouldn't be right. Besides, he's gone through this messy divorce and now he might be looking at a custody fight over his son. The last thing he needs in his life right now is that kind of distraction." "Maybe." Amy looked up at her mother and asked pointedly. "Are you okay with that though?" "Amy, when I say all I need right now is me and you, that isn't a lie. I appreciate that you feel simply being content isn't good enough for me, but it's better than being miserable. Who knows, maybe one of these days, Dipper will pull his head out of his butt, and we'll see what happens then." As mother and daughter shared a laugh, though Wendy from a separate reality had stopped eavesdropping. Her mind was swirling with everything she'd learned from her doppelganger from this dimension. The first two realities she had visited had painted such a rosy picture of her and Dipper's relationship and their future together. In this reality, they were both single parents who'd apparently never graduated past friends status despite seemingly having feelings for each other. Wendy never expected that her and Dipper would be tied at the hip in every reality. But if their relationship in this dimension was so complicated though, what did that mean for? No. Wendy told herself out loud. Whether the two of them were getting married in one reality, or were long-distance friends at best in another, none of it mattered. She, Wendy Corduroy, was her own person, and her version of Dipper Pines was his own person. Whether they lived happily ever after, or crashed and burned, it was their relationship, and they'd do it together. Nothing she witnessed in any of these worlds meant it was going to happen in hers. All she needed to focus on now was making sure the two of them actually had a chance to see what their futures had in store for them, together if she has it her way. Wendy wiped something from Mabel's eye she didn't care to mention. It was then she noticed a shiny orb-like object hanging from a tree branch. The light seemed to get brighter as if saying hello to her. The fragment. Wendy rushed over to the tree and grabbed the orb as if she were picking an apple from a tree. The image of Mabel smiling at the glowing ball in her hand quickly formed into Wendy's own face as she found herself back in the familiar cave from her own dimension. The shrine's main denizen greeted her with a familiar flair his kind was renowned for. Well, at least the two Wendy was familiar with. Well, if it isn't Ms. Corduroy, and with another memory fragment. Just one more to go and you'll have the entire set. Wendy ignored Cooper for the moment and pulled the larger orb out of her pocket. She placed it in her hand next to the smaller orb and smiled in satisfaction as they merged together. Only then did she turn her attention to Cooper, at least verbally, choosing to admire the swirling colors of the memory orb rather than look at Bill's cousin. Just one more, right? And then I get Dipper back? One more fragment. And then the memory of Dipper Pines will be restored to everyone's who've forgotten him, Cooper confirmed. Exciting, isn't it? Not amused, Wendy scowled in the direction of Cooper only for her expression to morph into one of confusion when she noticed he wasn't wearing his fedora. And that the resident bat seemed to be holding it in its mouth. What's the bat doing with your hat? Oh, that. Cooper grumbled, clearly not pleased with the arrangement. We came to a gentleman's agreement that my hat was roughly worth the $20 I owe him. Severely undervalued in my opinion. The bat squeaked something that made Cooper rather cross. Oh, stop rubbing it in. What the hell are you supposed to do with a hat anyway? You can't even wear it since all you do is hang upside down in this cave all day and night. I still don't have time for this. Wendy grumbled as she turned to face door number 4. This was it. One last reality to visit, and all of Dipper's memories will literally be in the palm of her hand. More than used to this process by now, Wendy showed no hesitation as he entered door number 4. Cooper placed his hands on his hips as Wendy exited the cave yet again, appearing quite pleased with how events were unfolding. Not that you could trust anything, he said, but Cousin Bill used to say humans were weak-willed and easy to break. I'm starting to have my doubts about that, or these two are just special. Either way, it should be interesting to see how Red handles the endgame. The bat squeaked something else unintelligible that made Cooper gasp. Don't you even dare. That's a fine piece of headwear you're drooling all over, not a toilet.